In the unforgiving territories of 1880s, Arizona, some names were spoken only in hushed, fearful whispers. One such name was Cole Corrigan, a man known to the world as the Apache. His ranch, Crimson Ridge, wasn't a place of opportunity. It was a final desperate stop on the road to ruin. Every hand who worked there either fled in terror or was carried out feet first. So when Jennifer Bell, a woman with a ruined reputation and nothing left to lose, answered the advertisement for a governess at the one place no one else dared to go, the folks in the town of Redemption didn't just call her brave. They called her a fool, already mourning a ghost. They were certain she was riding to her doom. What they didn't know was that sometimes the most dangerous places on earth are the only ones where a lost soul can truly find a home. The dust was a living thing. It coated Jennifer Bell's tongue, settled in the fine lines around her eyes, and worked its way into the very weave of her worn grey travelling dress. For 3 days, the stagecoach had rattled her bones and frayed her nerves, each mile taking her further from the woman she had been, and deeper into a future she couldn't comprehend. St. Louis with its gaslights, its polite society, and its vicious, unfounded rumors felt like a dream from another life. The scandal that had driven her out, a wealthy banker's son, a spurned advance, and a lie about stolen jewels, had been a swift and brutal execution of her character. At 26, Jennifer was an outcast, her teaching certificate rendered useless by whispers and scorn. That was why the crumpled newspaper advertisement in her reticule felt less like an offer and more like a prophecy. Governess wanted, Crimson Ridge Ranch, must be of sturdy constitution and sound mind, no questions asked, high wages, apply in person, town of redemption. The name itself, Redemption, was a bitter irony. Jennifer wasn't seeking redemption. She was seeking oblivion. A place so remote, so far from the wagging tongues of the civilized world, that the name Jennifer Bell could die and be forgotten. The stagecoach lurched to a halt in the center of the town, which was little more than a single dusty street flanked by sun-bleached wooden buildings. A saloon, a general store, a sheriff's office, and a livery stable. That was the sum of it. As Jennifer descended, clutching her single carpet bag, the heat hit her like a physical blow. The few faces that turned her way were weathered and wary eyes squinting against the relentless glare of the Arizona sun. Her first stop was the general store, a dim, cool space that smelled of coffee beans, leather, and dust. The proprietor, a balding man named Henderson with a stained apron, eyed her with open curiosity. "Looking for lodging, ma'am?" he asked, his voice a low drawl. "I'm looking for information," Jennifer replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "About the Crimson Ridge Ranch. I'm here to apply for the governess position." A tin of beans slipped from Henderson's hand and clattered to the floor. He didn't bother to pick it up. He stared at her as if she'd just announced her intention to wrestle a grizzly. You can't be serious," he stammered. "That's Corrigan's place." The advertisement said to apply in Redemption. I assumed someone here would know the way. Henderson wiped his sweaty palms on his apron. "Ma'am, folks don't go to Crimson Ridge. They run from it. The last man he hired to fix a well lasted half a day. Came back into town, white as a sheet, got on his horse, and didn't even stop for a drink." "Why?" Jennifer pressed a knot of apprehension tightening in her stomach. "It's the man himself," Henderson whispered, leaning over the counter. "They call him the Apache. Not 'cause of his blood, mind you. He's Irish as they come. But he's as wild and as cruel as the stories say they are. Lives out there, in the shadow of the mountains, with a child they say is touched in the head. A mute. Hasn't spoken a word since her mother. Well, since her mother died. The storekeeper's words hung in the air, heavy and ominous. The why of the mother's death was left unspoken, a blank space Jennifer's mind rushed to fill with terrible possibilities. "He's a hard man in a hard country," came a new voice from the doorway. Sheriff Brody stood there, a tall, lean figure with a silver star pinned to his vest, and eyes the color of faded denim. He took off his hat, revealing a line of pale skin on his forehead. "And that's the kindest thing you'll hear said about Cole Corrigan." He walked towards her, his spurs jingling softly on the wooden floorboards. "I'm Sheriff Brody. I saw you get off the coach. Figured you were either lost or running from something." His gaze was sharp, perceptive. "Looks like you might be both." "I'm here for the job, Sheriff," Jennifer said, lifting her chin. She would not be intimidated. She had faced down polite society. She could handle a frontier lawman. Brody sighed, running a hand through his sandy hair. "Ma'am, I have a duty to warn newcomers. That ranch is a good day's ride from here, and it might as well be on the moon. There are no neighbors. The only folks who go out that far are Chiricahua hunting parties, and they give the ranch a wide berth. Corrigan's reputation is forged in blood and silence. His wife, Maria. She was a vibrant, happy woman when he brought her here. A year later, she was in the ground, and their little girl Lena was a ghost. Corrigan won't say what happened. He just dug a grave, and the silence from that place got even louder." "High wages," Jennifer stated simply, though the money was secondary to the isolation. "Danger pay is what it is," Brody countered. "Listen, there's a woman who helps with laundry at the saloon. You could probably find work there. Honest work. Safe work." Jennifer thought of the leering men she'd glimpsed through the saloon's batwing doors. She thought of the condescending pity she would receive once her story inevitably followed her. Here in this raw, sun-scorched land, her past was a blank slate. The job at Crimson Ridge was a wall she could put between herself and the world. A high, dangerous wall. "Thank you for your concern, Sheriff," she said, her tone final. "But my mind is made up. Could someone tell me how to get to the ranch?" Sheriff Brody and Henderson exchanged a look of grim resignation. It was the look men give when they see someone walking willingly toward a cliff's edge. "Henderson will sell you a map," Brody said, his voice flat with disapproval. "You can hire a horse from the livery. But I'll tell you this, Miss Bell. Jennifer Bell." "Miss Bell," he said, his eyes locking onto hers. "When you decide you've had enough, if you're able, you ride back here. Don't stop for nothing. I'll see you get on the next coach out. No questions asked." It was the same phrase from the advertisement, but from the sheriff's lips, it sounded not like a promise of privacy, but a chilling premonition of flight. Jennifer bought a sturdy mare, a canteen, and a hand-drawn map. As she rode out of Redemption, she didn't look back. The setting sun cast the mountains ahead in a deep, bloody crimson, and she knew with a certainty that both thrilled and terrified her that she was riding straight into the heart of the story everyone in town was afraid to tell. The journey was a lesson in solitude. The dusty track marked on Henderson's map quickly dissolved into a faint trail, then nothing at all. Jennifer navigated by the landmarks he'd described: a sun-bleached arch of rock, a stand of skeletal cottonwoods by a dry creek bed, and finally the twin peaks that flanked the entrance to Corrigan's Valley. The land was beautiful in a brutal, unforgiving way. Saguaro cacti stood like silent sentinels, and the sky was a vast, indifferent canvas of blue. For the first time in months, Jennifer felt the tightness in her chest loosen. Out here, there were no whispers, no judging eyes. There was only the sun, the wind, and the rhythmic plodding of her horse. As dusk began to bleed across the horizon, she saw it. Nestled in a valley carved by an ancient river, Crimson Ridge Ranch was less a home and more a fortress. The main house was built of thick, dark timber and local stone, with high, narrow windows that looked like a marksman's slits. It was surrounded by a sturdy stockade fence, and the outbuildings, a barn, a bunkhouse, a blacksmith's shed were arranged with defensive precision. Smoke curled from the main chimney, the only sign of life. There was no garden, no sign of a woman's touch. It was a place built for survival, not for living. A man was waiting for her at the main gate. He was wiry and old, with a face like a dried apple, and he held a rifle with casual familiarity. "State your business," he grunted, his eyes scanning her from head to toe. "I'm Jennifer Bell. I'm here about the governor's position." The man spat a stream of tobacco juice into the dust. "Heard you was coming. Brody sent a rider ahead. The boss is in the house. Name's Gus. Put your horse in the barn. I'll take your bag." His tone wasn't welcoming, but it was practical. In this place that felt like a kindness. Jennifer did as she was told, the barn's interior dark and smelling of hay and horse. When she emerged, Gus was gone, her bag left on the porch of the main house. The heavy oak door was slightly ajar. Taking a deep breath, she pushed it open and stepped inside. The interior was as stark as the exterior. The main room was vast, dominated by a massive stone fireplace, where a low fire crackled, fighting off the evening chill. Furniture was sparse and heavy, a long dining table, a few chairs, a sideboard. The floors were bare wood, and the walls were adorned with rifles and maps of the territory. It was a man's room, built for utility, not comfort. And then she saw him. He was standing by the fireplace, one arm resting on the mantelpiece, staring into the flames. Cole Corrigan was taller than she had imagined, with broad shoulders that strained the fabric of his simple work shirt. His hair was black as a raven's wing, and a jagged scar, pale against his sun-darkened skin, ran from his temple down his jawline. When he turned to face her, his eyes were the most startling feature. They were a pale glacial blue, and they held an intensity that seemed to burn right through her. He was not handsome in the classical sense. His face was too harsh, too carved by hardship. But he was compelling, a figure of raw, coiled power. This was the cruel Apache. "Miss Bell," he said. His voice was a low baritone, a gravelly rumble that held no trace of welcome. "You came. The advertisement was still valid, I presume." Jennifer replied, her heart hammering against her ribs. "The job is yours if you want it. The last 3 applicants took one look at the place and turned around," he said, his gaze unwavering. "Your duties are simple. You will be responsible for my daughter Lena. You will attempt to teach her to read and write. You will see she is fed and cared for. You will not ask questions about my business, my past, or her mother. You will receive your pay at the end of each month. Your room is at the top of the stairs first on the left. You start tomorrow. Are these terms acceptable?" It was a speech devoid of any pleasantry, a list of commands. Yet in its directness, there was a strange sort of honesty. He wasn't pretending to be anything he wasn't. "They are," Jennifer said. As if on cue, a small figure appeared in the doorway of an adjoining room. The child, Lena, was perhaps 7 or 8 years old, with her father's black hair hanging in 2 unkempt braids. She wore a simple, oversized frock and clutched a small, crudely carved wooden horse. But it was her eyes that seized Jennifer's attention. They were enormous and dark, and they held an ancient, bottomless sorrow that had no place in the face of a child. She looked at Jennifer not with curiosity, but with a flat, empty gaze, as if she were looking at a piece of furniture. She didn't make a sound. "Lena." Corrigan said, his voice softening by a fraction of a degree. "This is Miss Bell. She will be staying with us." The child's expression didn't change. She simply turned and disappeared back into the room from which she had come. The silence she left behind was profound. "She has not spoken a word in 2 years," Corrigan stated, turning back to the fire. It wasn't an explanation. It was a fact, delivered like a weather report. "The doctor in Tucson said nothing is wrong with her throat. Her problem is in her head." He seemed to dismiss her then, his attention returning to the flames, as if their conversation was over. Jennifer stood for a moment, uncertain. The weight of the house, of the silence, of the sorrow in the child's eyes, pressed down on her. The town's warnings echoed in her mind. This was a place saturated with grief, ruled by a man who wore his cruelty like armor. She was about to retreat up the stairs when Corrigan spoke again, his back still to her. "There's stew on the stove. Gus and the other hand, a boy named Pete, have already eaten. Help yourself. And bolt your door at night." "Bolt it?" Jennifer asked, her voice a whisper. "Are we in danger?" He turned his head just enough to look at her over his shoulder. The firelight played across the scar on his face, making it seem to writhe. "Miss Bell," he said, his voice colder than the stone of the hearth. "In this country, you are always in danger. The question is from what?" With that, he walked out of the room, leaving Jennifer alone in the vast, firelit space. She listened to his heavy boots recede down a hallway, the sound swallowed by the thick walls of the house. She was alone with the crackling fire, the silent child in the next room, and the chilling finality of his last words. She had found her oblivion, but she was beginning to suspect she had found something far more terrifying in its place. The first week at Crimson Ridge was a study in silence and routine. Mornings began before dawn, with the sounds of the ranch stirring to life, the lowing of cattle, the clang of the blacksmith's hammer, the quiet murmurs of Gus and young Pete. Jennifer's world, however, was confined to the house and the small, silent girl who inhabited it. Lena was a ghost in her own home. She moved with an unnerving quietness, her large, dark eyes observing everything and revealing nothing. She ate what was put in front of her without complaint or pleasure. When Jennifer set out books and a slate, Lena would simply stare at them, her hands remaining limp in her lap. She would not meet Jennifer's gaze directly, her attention always fixed somewhere over Jennifer's shoulder, as if watching a past only she could see. Jennifer tried everything. She read stories aloud, her voice sounding unnaturally loud in the quiet rooms. She drew pictures of horses and cacti. She tried singing simple nursery rhymes, her voice cracking with the disuse of joy. Lena's reaction was always the same, a profound, unshakable stillness. It was like trying to fill a well that had no bottom. Cole Corrigan was an even more remote presence. He was gone before sunrise and often returned long after dark, smelling of dust, sweat, and leather. Their interactions were clipped and transactional. "The well pump needs a new washer. We're low on flour. Did the child eat?" He never asked about Jennifer's progress with Lena, as if he expected none. He watched her, she knew, with those piercing blue eyes, but his expression was always unreadable, a mask of stone. He was a fortress, just like his house. But fortresses, Jennifer knew, have cracks. The first crack appeared on a blistering afternoon. Jennifer, frustrated by another morning of failure, with Lena, had stepped out onto the porch for a breath of air. From there she could see the corral where Corrigan was working with a wild, unbroken Mustang. The horse was a magnificent creature, all black fire and panicked energy. But Corrigan was a study in patience. He didn't use force or a whip. He used his voice, a low, calming murmur, and slow, deliberate movements. He stood in the center of the corral for nearly an hour, simply letting the horse get used to his presence. There was a gentleness in his posture, a deep-seated respect for the animal's fear that seemed utterly at odds with the cruel man she had been warned about. He was not breaking the horse, he was persuading it. The second crack came from Lena herself. One evening, after a particularly silent dinner, Jennifer was clearing the plates. She had left a small piece of gingerbread on Lena's plate, a treat she'd baked in a fit of desperate creativity. Lena had not touched it. As Jennifer reached for the plate, Lena's small hand shot out and covered the gingerbread, a possessive, almost fierce gesture. Her eyes, for the first time, flickered up and met Jennifer's. It was only for a second, a brief, startled connection, but it was there. A spark in the void, a silent mine. Hope, a dangerous and unfamiliar feeling began to stir in Jennifer's chest. She began to change her approach. She abandoned the formal lessons. Instead, she started talking to Lena, constantly narrating her own actions as she swept the floor or kneaded bread. She brought the outside world in, placing a wildflower in a jar on the table, describing the colors of the sunset, pointing out a hawk circling high overhead. She didn't demand a response. She simply filled the silence with a soft, steady stream of observation of life. One afternoon, seeking refuge from the oppressive quiet of the house, Jennifer took a walk toward a small fenced-off area behind the main building. She had assumed it was a kitchen garden, though it was overgrown with weeds. But as she drew closer, she saw a single, simple wooden cross. There were no words on it, just a date carved into the wood. The ground around it was bare and untended. This was Maria Corrigan's grave. A coldness washed over Jennifer. The starkness of it, the neglect, seemed to confirm the town's darkest whispers. What kind of man would leave his wife's grave to be choked by weeds? She was about to turn away when something caught her eye. At the base of the cross, tucked almost out of sight, was a single small, freshly picked desert marigold. It was a tiny speck of vibrant yellow against the bleakness. Someone had been there, and recently. Her thoughts were interrupted by a sharp voice. "You shouldn't be here." She spun around. Cole Corrigan stood a few feet away, his face a thundercloud. He had approached without a sound. I'm sorry," Jennifer stammered. "I was just walking. This part of the ranch is private." He bit out his eyes, fixed on the grave, then on her, as if accusing her of trespassing on his grief. "It's a lonely place for a grave," she said softly, her fear eclipsed by a sudden wave of empathy. "She should have flowers." Corrigan's jaw tightened. "Flowers die." "What's the point?" His voice was rough, brittle. "The point is in the planting." Jennifer countered her courage, surprising her. "The point is in the remembering. A garden doesn't just grow flowers, Mr. Corrigan. It grows hope." He stared at her, his glacial blue eyes warring with some unspoken emotion. For a moment, she thought he would order her off his land entirely. The silence stretched thick with tension. He looked from her face to the neglected plot of land, and something in his rigid posture seemed to give way, a barely perceptible slump of his shoulders. "I don't know the first thing about gardens." He said the words sounding as if they were torn from him. "I do," Jennifer replied quietly. He gave a short, sharp nod, then turned and walked away, his long strides eating up the ground. It wasn't an apology, and it wasn't an invitation, but it wasn't a refusal either. It was a crack in the stone wall, wider than any she had seen before. That evening, as Jennifer was preparing for bed, she heard a soft scratching at her door. When she opened it, the hallway was empty. But on the floor, placed carefully in the center of the threshold, was the small, crudely carved wooden horse that Lena always carried. It was alone A message, an offering. Jennifer picked it up, her fingers tracing the worn wood. Downstairs, she could hear the faint, mournful sound of a harmonica. It was a simple, sad tune, played with a surprising tenderness. It was Cole Corrigan alone in the dark, speaking the language of sorrow he could not voice in the light. She bolted her door as she had been told, but for the first time, it didn't feel like she was locking danger out. It felt like she was locking a fragile, budding hope safely inside. A month into her tenure, the need for supplies became unavoidable. Gus and Pete could handle most of the ranch's needs, but household goods, flour, sugar thread, and Jennifer's secret weapon, a small bag of lemon drops she hoped might tempt Lena, required a trip to redemption. Cole announced it at breakfast, his tone flat and non-negotiable. "You'll ride into town with Pete today. Get what you need from Henderson's. Speak to no one else. Be back before dusk." The order rankled Jennifer. "I am perfectly capable of going alone, Mr. Corrigan." "This isn't St. Louis, Miss Bell," he retorted, not looking up from his coffee. "The trail isn't safe. You'll go with Pete." The journey with the young ranch hand was quiet. Pete was barely a man with a shy demeanor and a deep, unwavering loyalty to his boss. He answered Jennifer's questions about the landscape with single words, but offered nothing about the ranch or its owner. It was clear the code of silence extended to the hired help. Redemption felt different this time. When Jennifer dismounted in front of Henderson's general store, she wasn't an object of morbid curiosity, but of outright suspicion. Faces peered from behind curtains. Men talking on the boardwalk fell silent as she passed. She was now branded no longer just a foolhardy traveler, but Corrigan's woman. Inside the store, Henderson was polite, but cool. As he tallied her purchases, a woman with a face like a clenched fist and a severe black bonnet entered. Her name, Jennifer would learn, was Martha Webb. "Well, well," Mrs. Webb said, her voice dripping with sanctimonious venom. "If it isn't the governess from the devil's own homestead. I'm surprised he let you out of his sight. We all pray for your soul, you know. Living in that house of sin and sorrow." Jennifer's back stiffened. "I believe my soul is my own concern, madam." "Is it?" The woman pressed, stepping closer. "Or has he bewitched you, just as he bewitched that poor, simple Maria? She was a good Catholic girl from Tucson before he got his hands on her. Filled her head with wild ideas, dragged her out to that God-forsaken rock pile, and we all know how that ended." She made a sign of the cross. "Murder is a mortal sin, miss, even when the law is too frightened to call it by its name." The word murder struck Jennifer like a physical blow. It was one thing to hear vague, ominous warnings, but another to hear the accusation spoken so plainly. Before she could form a reply, a man's voice, smooth as oiled leather, cut through the tension. "Now, Martha, the lady is a guest in our town. Let's show some hospitality." Bartholomew Webb, Martha's husband, stood in the doorway. He was a large man, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit that seemed out of place in the dusty town. He owned the vast Webb Cattle Company, whose lands bordered Corrigan's, and his smile was wide and predatory. "My apologies for my wife's zeal, Miss Bell," he said, tipping his hat. "I am Bartholomew Webb. It's a pleasure to finally meet the brave woman who took on the territory's most difficult posting." "Mr. Webb," Jennifer acknowledged, her voice tight. "I confess I've had an interest in the Crimson Ridge for some time," he continued, his eyes glinting. A crying shame, a man like Corrigan, sitting on the best water rights in this county. The Cinder Creek runs right through his valley. I've made him several generous offers to buy him out. He could take his daughter somewhere civilized, get her proper medical care. He paused, letting his words sink in. But he's a stubborn man. Sentimental, I suppose. Or maybe he just likes his isolation. It allows a man to keep his secrets after all. The veiled threat was unmistakable. Webb was not just a nosy neighbor. He was a shark, circling, waiting for the scent of blood in the water. Mr. Corrigan seems quite capable of managing his own affairs, Jennifer said, gathering her packages. Webb's smile tightened. For now. But this is a hard country, Miss Bell. It has a way of breaking hard men. If you ever find the situation untenable, know that you have friends in redemption. My offer of safe passage out of this territory is always open. Jennifer paid Henderson her hands, trembling slightly. She walked out of the store into the blinding sunlight, Webb's words echoing in her ears. He wasn't offering help. He was trying to recruit a spy to pry open the cracks in Corrigan's fortress. The town's fear and hatred, stoked by the Webb's whispers, was a weapon pointed directly at Crimson Ridge. On the ride back, Pete was more talkative, spurred by what he'd overheard from the doorway. "Don't you listen to them, ma'am," he said, his young face earnest. "Especially not him. Webb's been trying to get the boss's land since he first filed the claim. Says the creek should be open range. The boss, he don't hold with that. Says the water belongs to the valley." "And Maria?" Jennifer asked quietly, unable to stop herself. "What do you know of what happened?" Pete's face clouded over. "I wasn't here then. Gus was. He don't talk about it. No one does. All I know is the boss ain't the man they say he is. He's just broken. That Webb fellow, though, he ain't broken. He's just mean." When they arrived back at the ranch, the sun was low in the sky. Cole was waiting on the porch, his posture rigid with tension. He didn't relax until both she and Pete were safely inside the stockade gate. He looked from the packages to her face, his eyes searching for something. "You were gone a long time," he said. "I met Mr. and Mrs. Webb." Jennifer stated plainly, watching for his reaction. A flicker of something dark and dangerous passed through his eyes. He didn't speak for a long moment. He simply took the heaviest of the sacks from her, his fingers brushing hers for a fleeting second. The contact sent a jolt through her, a surprising warmth. "Webb is a snake who thinks he's a king," Cole said at last, his voice low and guttural. "His words are poison. Don't let them in your head." He turned and carried the supplies into the house. That night, Jennifer lay awake, the conflicting stories battling in her mind. The town saw a murderer. Webb saw an obstacle. Pete saw a broken man. And she saw a man who could gentle a wild horse, who played a sad harmonica in the dark, and who left a single fresh flower on his wife's untended grave. She realized with a startling clarity that she no longer believed the whispers. But the truth she feared was buried deeper, and was far more dangerous than any rumor. The seasons began to turn. The brutal heat of summer gave way to the crisp, golden days of autumn. Life at Crimson Ridge settled into a new rhythm, one marked by Jennifer's quiet persistence. She and Cole had tilled the small plot by Maria's grave-planting wildflower seeds and hardy perennials. It was a silent, shared labor. They never spoke of Maria, but her presence was felt in the careful way he dug the earth and the gentle way Jennifer watered the new shoots. Lena, too, was changing. She had begun to follow Jennifer around the house, a small, silent shadow. She would watch with intense concentration as Jennifer cooked or mended. One day, Jennifer was humming a tune while kneading dough, and she saw Lena's fingers tapping out the rhythm on the table. It was a tiny miracle. Later that week, Jennifer found a perfectly rendered charcoal drawing of the wooden horse on her slate. The girl was listening. She was learning. She was still locked in her silence, but she was no longer empty. The catalyst, when it came, was violent and sudden, arriving in the form of a late autumn storm. It rolled in from the mountains without warning, a furious squall of black clouds, lightning, and torrential rain. The dry creek bed that snaked through the valley became a raging river in minutes. Jennifer had been in the barn with Lena, showing her a litter of new kittens when the storm broke. The rain came down in solid sheets, turning the world outside the barn doors into a grey, roaring blur. They were trapped. Hours passed. The storm raged on, and a new, more terrifying sound joined the chorus, the deep, groaning sound of rising water. Pete burst into the barn, his face pale with fear. "Ma'am, it's a flash flood. The creek's breached its banks. It's coming up towards the house." Panic seized Jennifer. Cole and Gus were out on the North Range, checking on a herd of cattle. They were miles away, with a raging torrent between them and the ranch. They were alone. The water was already ankle-deep in the yard. "The house!" Jennifer shouted over the roar. "We have to get to the house." Pete grabbed Lena, who was frozen with a wide-eyed terror that mirrored Jennifer's own, and hoisted her onto his shoulders. Jennifer gathered the kittens into a sack and followed, wading through the churning, muddy water that was now swirling around her knees. It was cold and terrifyingly strong. They made it to the porch just as a large log carried by the current slammed into the barn wall with a sickening crunch. The house, built on a slight rise, was safe for now, but they were stranded on a small island in a brown, angry sea. Night fell, but the storm did not abate. Jennifer lit every lamp in the house, a futile gesture against the immense darkness outside. Pete nervously paced the main room, rifle in hand, while Lena sat huddled in a chair by the cold fireplace, shivering, her eyes fixed on the windows, where lightning occasionally illuminated the churning water. It was close to midnight when Lena suddenly stiffened. She slid off the chair and pressed her face against the window pane, her small body rigid. "What is it, sweet girl?" Jennifer asked, kneeling beside her. Lena didn't answer. She just pointed a trembling finger into the darkness. Jennifer and Pete followed her gaze. At first, they saw nothing but the rain. Then another flash of lightning lit the scene, and they saw it, a single rider on a horse, struggling through the waist-deep water near the stockade fence. It was Cole. He was fighting the current, his horse stumbling, trying to reach the gate. As they watched, the horse lost its footing and went down with a terrified scream, throwing Cole into the maelstrom. "The boss!" Pete yelled, running for the door. "No, stay here with Lena!" Jennifer commanded, her mind racing. She grabbed a coil of rope from a hook by the door. "He'll be swept past the porch if we can throw him a line." She and Pete scrambled onto the porch, the wind and rain tearing at them. In the next lightning flash, they saw Cole, swept off his feet, clinging to a fence post, his strength clearly failing. "Mr. Corrigan!" Jennifer screamed, her voice lost in the storm. She tied one end of the rope to a porch support, and with Pete's help, threw the other end out into the darkness again and again. It fell short. He was too far away. They were going to watch him die. And then a sound pierced the storm's fury. It was a high, thin, desperate cry. "Papa!" Jennifer whirled around. Lena was standing in the open doorway, her small hands clutching the frame, her face streaked with tears and rain. She had spoken. She had screamed. The sound seemed to reach Cole, even over the roar of the flood. He turned his head, his focus finding the light of the doorway. He saw his daughter. A renewed surge of strength seemed to flow through him. He let go of the post and pushed off, swimming with powerful, desperate strokes toward the house. He was closer now. Jennifer and Pete threw the rope again. This time his hand caught it. With all their combined strength, they pulled him from the raging water and dragged him, coughing and exhausted, onto the safety of the porch. He collapsed onto the boards, but his eyes were fixed on the doorway. Lena ran to him, throwing her small arms around his neck, burying her face in his soaked shirt. Her body racked with sobs. "Papa!" she whispered over and over again. "Papa!" Cole held her, his own body trembling from cold and exertion. He looked over her head at Jennifer. His eyes, those glacial blue eyes, filled with a raw, unguarded emotion she had never seen before. It was gratitude. It was wonder. It was a lifetime of unspoken pain cracking wide open. Later, wrapped in blankets by the roaring fire, Gus had managed to start the storm finally receding to a low grumble. The truth came out. It didn't come in a rush, but in quiet, halting pieces as Cole held his sleeping daughter in his arms. "It wasn't me," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "It was never me." He told her about Maria, how she loved the wildness of the valley, how she was the one who insisted on living so far from town. He told her about the day it happened. He'd been gone just as he was today, moving cattle. He came home to a nightmare. "It was outlaws," he said, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "Riders, looking for the payroll from the Silver Lode mine. They thought I'd have it. But I wasn't here. Only Maria and Lena were." He choked on the words. "They tore the house apart. When Maria fought back, they killed her. Lena was hiding under the bed. She saw everything." Jennifer felt a cold horror wash over her. "I found her like that." Cole continued, his gaze lost in the fire. In the house with her mother's body. She hadn't made a sound. She never did again until tonight. And the town. "The sheriff," Jennifer asked, her voice barely audible. The tracks were washed away by a storm just like this one. There was no proof. The outlaws were long gone. All Webb and the others saw was me, a dead wife and a silent child. It was an easier story to believe I was the monster. So I let them. "Why?" Jennifer whispered. "Why would you let them think such a thing?" He finally looked at her, the full weight of his 2 years of grief and isolation in his eyes. "Because the story kept people away. It kept us safe. I built a wall of fear around this ranch, Miss Bell. I became the cruel Apache because I couldn't bear to lose anything else. Especially not her." He tightened his grip on the sleeping Lena. Suddenly, everything made sense. The fortress-like ranch, his silence, the neglected grave he couldn't bear to face, yet secretly visited, the intense protective fury in his eyes. It wasn't cruelty she had seen. It was pain, a profound, all-consuming pain shielded by a reputation he had allowed to be forged in lies to protect the only person he had left. The whispers from the past were just that, empty echoes. The truth unveiled by the storm was a tragedy far deeper and a love far stronger than she could ever have imagined. The floodwaters receded, leaving behind a scarred landscape of mud and debris. But within the walls of Crimson Ridge, something new had taken root. The silence was broken. Lena's voice, though quiet and hesitant, began to fill the house. She chattered to the kittens, asked Jennifer questions about the pictures in her books, and at night whispered stories to her father before she fell asleep. The transformation was miraculous. Cole, in turn, began to shed his armor of cruelty. He smiled, a rare and startling event that transformed his harsh features. He spoke to Jennifer not in commands, but in conversation, asking about her day, listening to her opinions. The House of Sorrow was slowly becoming a home. But their newfound peace was a fragile thing. In redemption, Lena's recovery was not seen as a miracle but as a threat. Bartholomew Webb heard the news from a gossiping Henderson and knew his time was running out. A healing family was a strong family. A talking child was a potential witness. and a man with something to live for was a man who would fight for his land. Webb's generous offers would no longer suffice. The first sign of trouble was subtle. A section of fence on the southern pasture was cut. A dozen head of cattle went missing. Gus, a seasoned tracker, found the tracks of 3 riders heading east toward Webb's territory. Cole confronted Webb in town the next week. The exchange was heated, drawing a crowd, but with no proof, Sheriff Brody could do nothing but issue a warning to both men. The second sign was more direct. Young Pete was ambushed while riding the fence line. He returned to the ranch with a nasty gash on his forehead and a story of being dragged from his horse by 2 of Webb's men who warned him that Crimson Ridge was unhealthy for anyone loyal to Corrigan. Cole knew what was coming. The nights grew tense. Gus and Pete took turns on watch rifles, always within reach. Jennifer learned how to load a Winchester, her hands steady, her face grim. She was no longer just a governess. She was a defender of this fragile home she had helped to build. The attack came on a moonless night. The first warning was the frantic barking of the ranch dogs, followed by the sharp crack of a rifle shot that silenced them. Then, the night erupted. Orange flames shot up from the barn. Webb's men had set it ablaze to draw them out. "They're here!" Gus yelled from the porch. "At least half a dozen of them at the tree line." Cole was already moving. "Jennifer, take Lena to the root cellar. Now bar the door, and do not open it for anyone but me." His voice was the iron command of a man facing battle, but his eyes, when they met hers, were filled with a desperate plea. Jennifer grabbed the terrified, crying Lena and hurried her down the narrow steps into the dark, earthy-smelling cellar. As she slid the heavy bolt into place, she could hear the splintering crash of the main room windows and the roar of gunfire. The siege had begun. For what felt like an eternity, the world was a cacophony of violence. The thunder of rifles, the shouts of men, the terrified whinnying of horses from the burning barn. Jennifer held Lena tight, shielding her ears, murmuring assurances she didn't feel. She was terrified, but a cold, hard resolve settled in her heart. She had not come this far, had not found this life, only to have it ripped away by a greedy cattle baron. Above them, Cole, Gus, and Pete fought with the grim efficiency of men defending their last bastion. They used the house's fortress-like construction to their advantage, firing from the narrow windows, forcing Webb's hired guns to stay in the open. But they were outnumbered. Jennifer heard a heavy thud against the cellar door, followed by a man's curse. They were trying to break in. She looked around the small, dark space, her eyes landing on the shelves of preserved goods. Her gaze fell on several large jars of kerosene for the lamps. An idea desperate and dangerous took hold. "Lena, sweet girl, I need you to be brave," she whispered. "Get into that farthest corner and cover your head." Working with frantic speed, she uncorked 2 of the kerosene jars and wedged them against the cellar door. Then she took a deep breath and waited. The pounding continued, and she could hear the wood of the door beginning to splinter. Suddenly, the firing from upstairs intensified, followed by a cry of pain that she recognized as young Pete's. They were losing. The cellar door buckled, a crack appearing near the top. A voice from the other side shouted, "It's giving way, get ready." Just as the door burst inward, Jennifer struck a match and threw it at the base of the door. The kerosene ignited with a deafening whoosh, sending a wall of flame and black smoke billowing up into the main room. The men who had been about to charge down the stairs screamed in agony and surprise as the fire engulfed them. The unexpected blast created chaos. In that moment of confusion, a new sound entered the fray, a chilling, high-pitched war cry that echoed from the ridges surrounding the valley. Cole, from his position at a window, saw them first. A dozen riders, their faces painted, descending from the hills like vengeful spirits. It was the Chiricahua. Cole's friend among the tribe, a stoic warrior named Taza, had seen the glow of the fire from his hunting camp, miles away. He knew it could only mean trouble for the man who had always treated his people with respect, the man they called Stone Hand for his unyielding integrity. Webb's hired guns caught between the determined fire from the house, the inferno at the cellar door, and the terrifying charge of the Apache warriors, broke and fled. Their greed was no match for the combined fury of men defending their home and allies honoring a friendship. The battle was over as quickly as it had begun. Bartholomew Webb, who had been directing the attack from a safe distance, was captured by Taza himself, his fine suit covered in dirt, his face a mask of disbelief and terror. As the sun began to rise, casting a pink glow on the smouldering ruins of the barn, Jennifer unbolted the cellar door and emerged into the smoke-filled house. Cole met her at the top of the stairs. He was covered in soot with a bleeding cut on his arm, but he was alive. He looked at the scorched remains of the cellar entrance, at her soot-stained face, and then he pulled her into his arms, holding her with a desperate strength that left no room for words. The siege was over. They had held the line. They had survived. And in the ashes of the attack, it was clear that Crimson Ridge was no longer just Cole Corrigan's ranch. It was theirs. The aftermath of the siege was a testament to both the violence of the night and the resilience of the human spirit. Sheriff Brody arrived from Redemption, with 2 deputies having been alerted by a rancher on the edge of the valley who saw the fire. He found a scene of grim resolution. Bartholomew Webb was tied to a chair on the porch, his arrogance shattered, while Taza and his warriors stood by a silent, powerful presence. Pete was being tended to by Jennifer, his leg wounded, but not broken. The barn was a smoking ruin, but the house, though scarred by bullets and smoke, was still standing. Brody listened to Cole's account to Pete's, and then looked at the undeniable evidence. He looked at Webb, whose blustering denials fell flat in the face of the truth. For the first time, the sheriff saw Cole Corrigan not as the mythic Apache, but as a man who had been pushed to the brink and had fought back. The law which had been so absent for Cole in his darkest hour finally arrived to serve him. Webb and the surviving members of his gang were taken away in irons, their reign of whispers and terror over. As Taza and his men prepared to leave, the warrior approached Cole. They spoke for a moment in the Apache tongue, a language of mutual respect. Taza then turned his gaze to Jennifer, his dark eyes assessing her with an unnerving intensity. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. He had seen the fire at the cellar door. He recognized a fellow warrior when he saw one. In the weeks that followed, a new life began to bloom from the ashes. The people of Redemption, faced with Webb's undeniable guilt, had to confront their own complicity. Their fear and suspicion had nearly allowed a good man to be destroyed. Henderson the storekeeper was the first to extend an olive branch, riding out with a wagon of donated lumber and supplies to help rebuild the barn. Others followed. The wall of fear around Crimson Ridge came down not by force, but by the slow, steady dismantling of lies. Inside the house, the changes were even more profound. The last vestiges of Cole's harsh facade melted away, replaced by a quiet warmth that settled deep in his eyes whenever he looked at Jennifer or Lena. He and Jennifer worked side by side, rebuilding the barn, replanting the garden, their hands often brushing their conversations easy and natural. The unspoken truth of their feelings for one another hung in the air as clear and bright as the Arizona sky. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the ridges in hues of orange and purple, Lena sat between them, drawing on her slate. She had drawn a picture of their house, not a fortress, but a home with smoke curling cheerfully from the chimney and 3 figures standing out front, holding hands. Cole took Jennifer's hand, his calloused palm enveloping hers. "I hired a governess, Jennifer Bell," he said, his voice soft. "I never expected to find a partner, a savior, I think." He hesitated, the words new and unfamiliar to his tongue. "I think Maria would have liked you. She would have loved what you've done for this place. For us." Jennifer's heart swelled. She looked at the scarred, strong man beside her, and the bright, happy child between them. She thought of the desperate, disgraced woman who had ridden into redemption, seeking oblivion. She hadn't found it. Instead, she had walked into the one place nobody wanted a place, ruled by a man everyone feared, and in the heart of that fear and sorrow, she had discovered the truest, most vibrant life she had ever known. She had found a family forged in fire, and a love as rugged and enduring as the land itself. "This ranch, they named it for the color of the mountains at sunset," she said, squeezing his hand. "But I think they got it wrong." Cole looked at her, a question in his pale blue eyes. "It's not about the color of the rock," she said, a smile gracing her lips for the first time in what felt like a lifetime. "It's about the color of a heart learning to beat again." The job nobody wanted had given her everything, and as the first stars pricked the velvet darkness of the desert sky, Jennifer Bell knew with absolute certainty that her best days were just beginning. So the story of Jennifer Bell and the cruel Apache's ranch comes to a close. It's a tale that reminds us that the fiercest reputations often hide the deepest wounds, and that courage isn't the absence of fear, but the choice to ride toward it. Jennifer wasn't looking for a fairy tale. She was looking for a place to disappear. Instead, she found a place where she could finally be seen, a place where her strength, intelligence, and compassion were not just valued, but were the very keys to unlocking a family's future. It proves that sometimes the jobs nobody wants, the paths nobody dares to walk, lead to the most beautiful destinations. If this story of resilience, love, and redemption in the harsh but beautiful Wild West resonated with you, please take a moment to hit that like button. Share it with someone who loves a story where hope is found in the most unexpected of places. And most importantly, subscribe to our channel for more tales from the frontier. Your support helps us keep these stories alive. Thank you for listening.